The three-strike rule assumes that the boundary you're going to set with a pathological narcissist will not be accepted. It absolutely requires your knowledge of the narcissist, their reaction to the boundary, and your knowledge about narcissistic injuries. This is not an exercise of setting boundaries. This is an exercise of self-love. This is an exercise of self-care. Because in the three-strike rule, the only boundary you're setting is your boundary to keep safe. It's a boundary for yourself. In other words, when you set a boundary with a pathological narcissist, they are going to react, and they are going to react strongly, punitively, harshly, or passive-aggressively. They will do it secretly, or they will do it in your face. They might be violent. There are so many reactions that you will observe based upon their unique form of pathological narcissism. So the three-strike rule requires you to know that they're a pathological narcissist, to know that the boundary will elicit a sharp, reactive narcissistic injury. It requires you to understand the type of narcissistic injury that they usually have, and the consequence of that. Once you can predict the reaction to the boundary and can imagine you surviving the narcissistic injury and the consequence, then you are ready to engage them, but not before you put on your full observe, don't absorb suit. And I say this because the observe, don't absorb suit is just an analogy. It could be your armor. It could be any of the observe, don't absorb defense fantasies that prepare you to not allow them to get inside of you. So now that you are prepared to set the boundary, you know about the narcissism, you know about the narcissistic injury, you know the type it's probably going to be and the consequence that's going to follow, you are in your metaphorical ODA, observe, don't absorb, suit. Some people like to think of it as a bulletproof vest. Some people think of it as a, armor. Some people like my Spock thing. Other people. There's so many different defense fantasy options to protect you. Now the rule itself is 3 boundaries, 3 statements, 3 strikes. The boundary should have what you want them to stop. There should be a brief explanation for why you want them to stop it. And there should be the consequence for them not to stop it. The first strike is the longest. And it sounds like, for example, if it's a mother who is horribly narcissistic, who is controlling you with money, or the threat of turning family members against you, and you would say, Mom, if you don't stop yelling at me, or if you don't stop trying to talk to my son and tell him bad things, or if you don't stop kicking me, or whatever is the boundary, is the action or the behavior or the situation for which you are setting a boundary, I will do this. And then you say the consequence. I will be dropping you off at home and ending our lunch date. I won't be talking to you anymore for at least a couple of weeks. I will, if you feel unsafe, I will be calling the police. The third part is why. I am doing this because you make me feel unsafe and I don't want to, and I want to protect myself. So strike 1, quickly, is you're setting the boundary. You're telling someone to stop something that is adversive, difficult, hurtful, harmful, manipulative. Stop doing this because it makes me feel unsafe. Because I don't let anyone abuse me. And if you don't stop, I'm going to do this. Mom, stop yelling at me because it makes me feel unsafe. And if you don't stop, I'm dropping you off back at your house. Boyfriend, Jack, if you continue to push me, I am going to call the police because I am feeling unsafe. If it's your son, Sam, if you don't do your homework or if you don't listen to my rules, I am going to take away your cell phone because children should respect their parent. Strike one is the full delivery of the boundary, the explanation, and the consequence. Now, you're an ODA, and you know that the narcissist is going to react with a narcissistic injury. Remember, we started off with that. So you're observing them react. You're not absorbing. You have your full ODA defense fantasy regalia on. The bullets bounce off. They can't get through to you. And then you go to strike two. Strike two is the paraphrasing of what you did in strike one. And you make a self-effacing statement. You kind of make a joke or you act like that maybe you didn't explain it well. Okay, I'm sorry, Mom. I probably didn't explain this well, so let me try this again. If you continue to yell at me, I'm going to drop you off at home because I don't want to feel unsafe anymore. So what you've done is you've paraphrased, simplified the first strike. Then, of course, you're going to sit back, observe and don't absorb the reaction. Okay, because they're now going to get even more frustrated because you're not being pulled into what I call the wrestling ring, the area in which they have all the power. If they can get you to fight, if they can get you to be mad, if they can get you to argue with them, if they can get you to be scared, if they can get you to defend yourself, then they got you. But instead, you've maintained your emotional equanimity by using observe, don't absorb. You have not answered any of their questions or allegations or threats. You just repeated the boundary, the first strike. In the three-strike rule is you cannot answer them at all. You cannot engage in any defensive posture. You cannot respond to anything they're saying. You have to stay in your ODA mode and you have to deliver the three strikes. Because in the American sport baseball, 3 strikes, you're out. So now you're watching them. You're staying out of what I call the wrestling ring. Because you know what? It's their wrestling ring. Because once you engage them, once you drop your observe, don't absorb protection, they get to you. Strike 3 is the delivery of the boundary in its most concise way, and you execute the consequence. Mom, I'm sorry that you're not understanding or respecting my boundary for you to stop yelling at me. And like I said, I don't feel safe, and so I'm going to drop you off at home. The hardest part now is to stay in ODA, because when the narcissist sees that you have not responded to any of their instigations, their manipulations, they will go, and I will say psychologically, they will go bananas. They will go off their rocker. And that's where you need to do your observe, don't absorb technique. That's where the ODA is most important. And then you have to remove yourself. if you're in a situation where you cannot remove yourself physically for all sorts of reasons, and you're not in jeopardy of physical harm, then you observe, don't absorb, and you remove yourself emotionally. Your disassociation and your disassociation through ODA will keep you safe. So in summary, the 3-strike rule is setting the boundary to a pathological narcissist, explaining to them why the boundary is and the consequence for it, and watching them blow up, giving them an opportunity to blow up at every stage while you're not absorbing it, and then executing it. The purpose for this is just not to protect yourself. And that is a major purpose. It is to set up a new interactional dynamic that the narcissist will start to either accommodate to and start to back down behaviorally, or the relationship will fall apart. And I say this all the time, is narcissists cannot grow psychologically because of ODA, because of boundaries. It would take years of psychotherapy to do that. But if they need something from you, they will accommodate to the boundary behaviorally. Once they find out that they can't bring you into their wrestling ring, once they find out that they can't pull you into your vulnerable spot, your spot of weakness, and they're not getting what they need, you'll find out how afraid they are, how lonely they are, and their willingness to compromise, stop, or just quit their pain. And in conclusion, don't believe it. Their acquiescence to your boundary, their respect to your boundary, does not mean they learned anything. It just means you've succeeded in keeping yourself safe, and you need to keep the boundary up. So that is the 3-strike technique.